When I first started watching Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, I thought it was pretty solid. Not perfect or without noticeable problems, but it was solid enough for me to think we were going a decent direction. But as we moved along and more episodes were released, I started noticing more problems. And it was the second to last batch of episodes where I realized that the show was deeply flawed. I'd go as far to say it's bad. That's not to say that there was a lack of passion or care in the production, or that all of its ideas should have been thrown off the table. I still think they had an interesting premise to work with, and it all really came down to execution. Shout out to Comic Legend from League Entertainment for helping out with a lot of the points in this video. Much of the discussions we've had led to many of the points you'll be hearing. The first episode covers Peter Parker's origin, which takes a few spins on what we're traditionally used to. Right off the bat, Uncle Ben is already dead. This is before Peter has gotten his powers, so it sounds to me like his death was never something for Peter to feel guilty about, nor does it play into what transforms him into a hero. And while I'm accepting of changes to the source material, I typically want something as substantive or improved upon as a result. But all this change really does is remove a major element of Peter's depth as a character, and I'm left wondering to myself what motivates him to be a hero. Right off the bat, he's essentially willing to confront a symbiote monster here, before he even gets his powers. He already puts his normal self on the line to help someone he doesn't know, so if his origin story does nothing to actually transform Peter as a character, if there's no necessary growth for him to become a superhero, why do I care about where he came from? Why are we telling the origin story that does nothing to change him as a character? For those watching, really ask yourselves this. How did Peter change from before he got his powers to the time skip where you see him fighting crime and setting aside his personal life to do so? Nothing about him has changed as far as we're shown. We spend about a third of the episode on Peter simply getting his powers, and it ultimately achieves nothing for any of the characters, nor does it establish any real conflict to be invested in. Compare that to the Spectacular Spider-Man, which is quick to introduce us to Peter Parker's financial struggles. It already tells us where Peter failed, and how he needed to transform himself before he could call himself a superhero.
I can't let Harry lose his dad the way I lost Uncle Ben.
This episode isn't even telling us an origin story, yet it provides a more substantive take on it, and it wastes no time in doing so. Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man pauses its origin to have Doctor Strange fight what looks to be a symbiote creature for a solid 3 minutes. We go from the introduction to a Spider-Man show to 3 minutes dedicated to a Doctor Strange short film. Doctor Strange is not a prominent character, and this fight isn't important to the overall plot of the show. So what justifies spending this much time when all it really achieves for this episode is justifying where the radioactive spider came from? This is really off-putting from a pacing perspective. We then get a time skip to a few months later, skipping over any struggles Peter would have to transition into a superhero life or even get used to his powers. It's a bit strange to dedicate a third of the episode to how he gets his powers, but skipping over how this changes Peter as a character and the natural learning curve that comes with his powers. Imagine if Into the Spider-Verse just cut out everything involving Miles' struggle with his powers or accepting the responsibility that comes with being a superhero. We'd get no moments of him learning to do it on command, or a leap of faith that cements his acceptance of being Spider-Man. We would never see him build the bravery to leap from buildings and swing from high skyscrapers. What would someone who's never been a superhero know about living the life of one when suddenly being given a set of powers? It's not something people can just figure out on the flip of a dime. In the show, Peter is already great at swinging. He's already a natural at putting aside his personal commitments to do superhero work. We never see him grow. There's no hesitation or transition into becoming a superhero at all for Peter, which makes me wonder why we're even touching the origin at all if we're not even going to bother with what it does to transform Peter's character. And I understand there's talk about how, we already know Peter Parker's origin, we don't need to see the origin story again, and that's all well and good, that's what the MCU did. But at the same time, they spent 8 minutes on just the origin story of him getting his powers. If you're going to spend a third of the episode on this, why are we skipping over the most substantive material for his character? Good origin stories, not just of Spider-Man, will draw focus on the flaws of our protagonist, while also showing us the transition between who they were before becoming a superhero and what it took to uphold that title. That's what builds the humanity in our characters, while giving them the depth and complexity that forms a unique identity. Peter Parker in the show is mostly a generic superhero. By this point, nothing has been said about him as a person outside of the fact that he wants to help people. Why should I be invested in the superhero, let alone this version of Spider-Man, if nothing has been done to give him a unique identity? He had no flaws to overcome to even become Spider-Man. He already puts his superhero stuff first without any hesitation. He doesn't even consider stepping back from it despite the damage it could do to his personal life. He's apparently so good of a Spider-Man that he's willing to die to save a random criminal later on. It becomes hard to invest in a Spider-Man that barely has anything to learn from. So at this point, I think it's pretty clear that the origin story of Spider-Man has already failed from a storytelling and pacing perspective. One of the problems I mentioned was how disruptive Doctor Strange was to the pacing. However, from a consistency perspective, the events of the fight itself don't make any sense at all, despite being the cause of Peter getting his powers, which weirdly complicates the simple origin story of Spider-Man. I'm aware that something in the finale will make all of this even worse, but let's be patient for now. The action sequence begins with Doctor Strange dropping the symbiote creature by opening a portal to a random street by Midtown High. Not quite the place to engage in combat with the hulking symbiote creature. Later on in the fight, we're shown that Doctor Strange can open portals at will and choose where it leads to. So Doctor Strange didn't even need to lead the portal to the school, and even after the symbiote creature drops down, he could bring this creature to the desert or something. Why does Aunt May and Peter hide behind their car and just stop there? Aunt May should be running or driving Peter away from the scene to ensure his safety. He is her #1 priority. She's literally just standing there with Peter spectating this, when either of them could be killed by this creature if they stick around too closely. You'd especially expect Aunt May to be on top of this after having lost Uncle Ben, yet she's careless when her son is in danger. Strange tries to engage with this thing in hand-to-hand combat as opposed to using any of his spells to counter its attacks. Bit of a strange choice for someone of Doctor Strange's power. Doctor Strange is also known to be capable of shifting gravity. He does this to push down the symbiote creature and open a portal in the city as opposed to an area that would likely be empty. Why not put the symbiote creature in the water when Doctor Strange has the advantage of flying?
You gotta be kidding me.
This feels all too familiar. Why not open a portal to bring that car somewhere safer? Why allow it to crash into the school at all? If he was willing to use the time stone to prevent harm to children and staff, then why wouldn't he use the time stone to open the portal elsewhere to begin with? Why are Peter and May still here? They almost get crushed by a car that the symbiote throws because they decided to literally just stand there. This is especially out of character for Aunt May, like I said earlier. At least Homecoming remembered that she cared about Peter's safety.
If you spot something like that happening, you turn and you run the other way.
And what is Strange even doing while this is happening? What's Strange doing while Venom targets other students and Peter has to step in to distract it? He was still awake because the cloak caught him, so he just needed to open a portal under the symbiote and send him away from the school. He shows us that he can multiply his arms to increase his strength, but apparently didn't think to do that earlier when initially holding the symbiote. This entirely nonsensical fight is how Peter Parker gets his powers. If Aunt May had been a responsible parent and evacuated Peter, if Strange had the common sense not to lead a portal to a school or to move the fight away from the school, then the spider wouldn't have lowered itself and fall down to bite Peter. The most positive thing I have to say about this episode is that Lonnie is explored in an interesting manner and is given a neat start for his character. We get a good enough introduction to Peter's supporting cast and it leaves potential for some really great character moments. And I like the homage to Civil War as they set up Norman Osborn. But as it stands right now, Peter has a bad origin story, the pacing was off with the Doctor Strange fight, where he's a complete moron throughout, and Aunt May is already taking some damage as a character for not ensuring Peter's safety in that scene. So overall, this first episode is a 4 out of 10. Episode 2 opens with Peter meeting Norman Osborn and being offered the internship. The first half of this episode is largely dedicated to Peter's adjustment to the new internship and how it starts to affect his personal life. Though I think the pacing could have been sped up a bit since this takes us around 15 minutes, I think this is solid material to work with overall. I think this achieves a good enough introduction for this plotline in the series. I also like seeing Peter struggling to adapt to his position and how this adds on to his numerous responsibilities. While it's not a whole lot to talk about considering how long it takes for something else to happen, I think it's serviceable enough to progress the story. Peter eventually spots a report of a building being set on fire, which results in another Spider-Man action scene. Although Spider-Man is new to this, I find him pretty dumb in this fight considering what we saw in the last episode. Just to refresh, he can dodge hits from regular people very easily and counter them in the process. So keep that in mind before responding to anything I say by saying that Spider-Man is inexperienced. So Spider-Man knows that this building is burning and while nobody's inside, it's still not safe for the people surrounding the building that could fall apart, and fires are bad for the environment. So I kinda expect urgency from him in this situation. So he sees this arsonist turn his back to him and look out the window, and he doesn't think to trip him with his webs. He doesn't think to web his gauntlets off or to remove them upon webbing him to the wall. He literally just stands there and lets him turn around and shoot more fire and risk further destruction to the building. And it's just so he can joke around.
You're burning the wrong building down, dude.
I'm glad somebody has time to enjoy themselves when there's so much at stake.
With that level of productivity, he might as well shake his hand and ask him to dinner. Spider-Man keeps dodging his hits but never thinks to counter by shooting a web at him, similar to how we would have seen him counter others in combat while evading them. Later on, this guy gets damaged from a fall and Spider-Man is now fighting him in the shop. It's weird how after Spider-Man lands a shot on this guy, then uses the environment to attack him, he just stands there and watches him recharge his gauntlets to do further attacks. He just needs to trip him or web him to the wall right there, but he proceeds to just stand there and talk. It's not a great look that Peter isn't taking an arsonist seriously when this puts the safety of the city at risk, even when he has shown more care in a fight earlier in the show. These are definitely problems, but they don't ruin the episode because most of what happened before or after is generally fine. I do think the villain is really one note and that's going to be a recurring weakness in the show, which I'll get into as we move along. I also think it's a little strange that Connors' cover story for Peter is that she sent him to go get supplies.
Peter is just getting supplies from Dr. Bond's office. I, in fact, sent him to.
Interesting story, but how is that meant to stick if Peter never comes back with any supplies? Couldn't she just have said that he was in the bathroom or something if she wanted to cover for him? Well, it's a little strange too, considering that Dr. Connors doesn't know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. She doesn't even know what she'd be covering for because she literally just met Peter. From her perspective, there's no reason he should be absent, and if there is a good reason, he would just say it when he returns. It's a bit strange to explore the difficulty of balancing both lives as Peter Parker and Spider-Man, yet have people he barely knows cover for him when they don't even know he's Spider-Man. I think it would have been better if Connors had talked to him about the importance of staying committed and on time in spite of his apparent intelligence. You know, brilliant but lazy type deal.
Being brilliant's not enough, young man. You have to work hard.
It was a neat reveal that Osborn was looking into the identity of Spider-Man, which the next episode gets into more detail. Some have questioned why Peter didn't notice the camera in the stairwell, but I imagine that Norman would have made it a hidden camera that wouldn't be noticed when rushing for an emergency. I assume this was the closest exit for Peter and he wanted to react as quickly as possible. This is something I can give a pass due to his lack of experience and considering how urgent the matter was, but it's not a pass I can give to later instances I'll talk about. As it stands right now, I think this episode is a 6 out of 10. It for sure has its problems, but it's passable enough for me to say that it works overall as a continuation. There is definitely potential for this show to be great by this point. This next episode brings us to a dinner meeting with Peter and Norman. I think they did a great job portraying Norman as very kind and helpful for Peter. Obviously, we know that Norman is up to no good, but positive interactions like this help us understand why Peter wouldn't suspect that Norman is up to no good. And I think that's definitely a strength in a lot of Peter and Norman's interactions in the series. I also like that Peter at least tries to cover up his identity before fully admitting it to Norman. Finding ways to twist moments he gets caught is definitely something I'd expect from Peter, and it makes for some neat humor. Peter then talks a little more personal about himself, and we get this line from Peter.
The day I got these powers, I wasn't sure why. You know, why me? Why not someone else? Someone that could have been the next Captain America instead of some kid from Queens. But now I truly believe that I have these powers to help people, to protect them as Spider-Man.
That's quite a lot they've skipped over, despite wanting to tell us an origin story in the first episode. It would have been a lot nicer to see Peter struggle with that feeling of inadequacy before he declares himself as Spider-Man. Comparing himself to heroes like Captain America would have been an interesting way to get him to question if he can live up to the responsibility that being a hero calls for. It would be a great way to humanize Peter and establish some character flaws to overcome before he fully accepts his job as a hero. At least Far From Home showed us that internal conflict, whether you like the execution or not. There was at least an attempt to show us that development instead of skipping it off screen and never seeing that growth.
Does anyone have any neighborhood questions?
There's some big shoes to fill.
I'm gonna go. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming.
Because I have too much of a responsibility.
I don't know if that's me happy. I'm not Iron Man.
And you'll notice that we actually see Peter and Happy have a serious conversation, which speaks to where Peter's weaknesses are and how he overcomes them through being shared a newer perspective.
What are you gonna do about it?
I'm gonna kick his ass.
And he overcomes that on screen because we expect to follow our hero's journey instead of having their issues resolved off screen. Whatever consistency problems you have with Far From Home, you have to at least acknowledge that their structure in trying to tell Peter's story is sound. Yet in this show, these episodes have shown us that their storytelling of Peter's journey is structurally messy and skips over important chapters for no justified reason. Why would I want to follow a character's journey if important areas of weakness are resolved off screen? Why is Spider-Man the central character in the show if they're not willing to fully explore this this character. We're then introduced to the villains of the episode. They're being sold advanced technology, by who is later revealed to be Otto Octavius. Something I want to compliment here is the way in which the deal is shown to us. Essentially, a garbage dump with legs delivers the tech and walks away with the money. I think it's an effective and creative way of showing us Otto's intellect, by giving us an unexpected, yet cool way of showing us how he runs his deals. Not only does it display Otto's technical strengths, but it also highlights his tactical strengths as well. Seeing that he's in the crime business, it is ultimately safer if he conducts these deals remotely through his machinery. It ensures his own safety and that his base of operations can't be located by random criminals. While it's not revealed to be Otto yet, I think this is an interesting way of setting that up. We're then shown Aunt May packing a bunch of items for sale. Much of this includes Uncle Ben's stuff, and Peter and Aunt May have a talk about it, which eventually leads to this line from Aunt May.
Most of this stuff is either new or, well, belong to Ben.
You know, I thought it would be hard, Peter, but it's okay. Sometimes things just gotta get done, whether you want to do them or not.
And that's it. That's the end of their discussion about selling Ben's belongings. This will be similar to the problem I've mentioned with Peter earlier, but I think it's really weak storytelling to have throwaway dialogue about how Aunt May thought it would be hard to let go of Ben and sell his stuff to help their financial situation, but she just gets over this very quickly. They establish a character flaw for Aunt May in throwaway dialogue, where in that same dialogue, she says it's okay and that she already overcame said character flaw. It would have been nicer if we actually saw this growth from Aunt May instead of it being resolved off screen, especially since this series doesn't actually do anything of substance with Aunt May. Aunt May barely has anything to do in this series. She has little to no standout moments as a character. Why should I be invested in characters who have their character flaws resolved off screen? What is there to follow or invest in at this point? One of my favorite parts about Spider-Man 2 is how Aunt May is shown to be a very vulnerable character, starting very early in the film. She still isn't over the loss of Ben, and it shows in her interaction with Peter.
Oh, what, Ben? Hmm? Oh, Peter. Oh, for a second there, I thought I was years ago.
No, I can't take that.
Yes, you can. You can take this money from me. For God's sake, it's not much. Now take it. And don't you dare leave it here. Oh, I'm sorry. It's just that I miss your Uncle Ben so much.
We see how this holds Aunt May back and why it's a weakness for her. She continues to struggle making ends meet when she has an easier solution in selling the house, but it takes time for her to achieve that development. Several events build up to that decision she makes. While she would always blame herself for her loss, and it always played into her mental state, that changes during a pivotal moment when Peter admits to the truth about Uncle Ben. He confesses to her that he was responsible the whole time and didn't know how to tell her, which leaves her shocked and with nothing to say. After all, they did set this up earlier.
I think to myself at times, were I to face the one responsible for what happened, I don't know what I'd do.
Part of her moving on requires her to forgive Peter for what happened to Ben. All of the grief she's experiencing is taking a toll on her, and she struggles with making the best choices because of it. And seeing that Peter shares that feeling of guilt due to having a bigger hand in how Ben died, she realizes that her way of grieving will only rub onto Peter and make his life worse too. It's why she doesn't want to say anything hurtful to him. She simply leaves because she doesn't know how to react. And when Peter revisits her, he sees that Aunt May is ready to move past her grief and sell the house, and that's what allows her to forgive Peter and commend his honesty and growth. That's so much to unpack with just her character alone in that movie. Yet when we compare to this full season of television, we have nothing to dive into because the show doesn't bother to explore Aunt May. She's a very flat character in the series. However, I do like what the show is doing with Lonnie right now. I like that they're building upon his home life by showing that his brother got himself into trouble and how that's leaving a huge impact on his family. And they do a great job of highlighting his character strengths, being his loyalty to his family and ensuring the best life for his brother. And I like that he takes his place in the 1/10th gang so that he could still live out a good childhood, and this definitely helps make Tombstone's potential turn hit harder. When the two villains arrive at the store, they attempt to rob them and Spider-Man webs one of them up. Spider-Man saw him about to activate dangerous technology, and clearly sees gauntlets on the other one's wrists. So seeing how destructive his last encounter was, I'd expect him to take this one a little more seriously. To Peter's credit, he webs this guy first to ensure he doesn't do anything, but I don't know why he doesn't do the same to the other villain.
Have you out in a sec, babe?
Yeah, sorry, miss, but you can't tear those webs.
How would Peter know that? He has seen his webs broken by an earlier supervillain and can clearly see high-tech gauntlets on this person's hands. So why does he assume that she can't tear through them and literally just stand there? He even saw her push a button to activate it. So why does he just stand there and watch her tear open the webs? And why not web both of them after she tears through the webs? He instead just throws a joke at them and allows them to retaliate.
You one of those CrossFit people?
I'm glad somebody has time to enjoy themselves when there's so much at stake.
He might as well well shake their hands and ask them to dinner if he doesn't care to be productive. Recall that these are normal people, Spider-Man can trip these people very easily, but he just watches them walk in preparation for a fight despite having no clue how destructive or effective this technology is. No wonder he gets beaten up afterwards. We then cut to Lonnie entering Donovan's base. Apparently the leader of a criminal gang is okay with anyone entering. Does he not have constant security at the front door? Is he just okay with people he doesn't trust walking into his base of operations? Imagine if Lonnie was undercover or on a wire. Imagine if he just told his parents he'd be here and he tries to out this criminal organization that the police were after.
He tells me Andre was vandalizing a building with some hoodlums, calling themselves the 110th Street Gang.
Imagine if Lonnie was being followed by the police as a suspected accomplice to his brother. He already gets profiled by them, so this isn't unlikely. And they explain how Lonnie found his brother by making a joke about how he's on a family phone plan.
How'd you even find me?
You're on a family plan, genius.
Yeah, it's a funny joke, but this is indicative of Donovan's incredible stupidity. Why isn't it standard protocol to disable forms of tracking before entering the 110th base? The police had to track down Lonnie's brother, and if they decided to do so after he ran away from home, which could easily be reported by Lonnie or his parents, then they would be able to do so by asking if his family has any means of tracking him. If Lonnie went to his parents about this or even brought the police for protection, then Donovan's gang hideout would have been found, and this puts him in trouble with the police. Funny comparison here. Remember when the 90s series showed that Spider-Man's spider tracers stopped working the moment Rhino reached the Kingpin's hideout?
Lost him. Either my tracer's been destroyed, or he's in a place that's built like a fortress.
That's a great example of how you write a crime leader that operates with basic precautions, and then Donovan just introduces himself to Lonnie for some reason.
I'm Big Donovan, leader of the 110th Street Gang.
He can't even keep his own name a secret or his position in the gang. Imagine if any of that information made it to the police. Lonnie could have given up his name as this big gang crime leader behind numerous crimes in the city. He could have faked his loyalty to the gang and went to the police once he and his brother were secured. He has a direct lead to the leader of the crime that got his brother in trouble to begin with. And on top of all this, why would Donovan trust a kid with the location of his base? Not only are kids easier to influence and are worse at keeping secrets, but they can also be really stupid. If the police interrogated Lonnie's brother, they could easily utilize interrogation tactics to get him to spill their base of operations. He could be convinced by his parents to stop listening to Donovan and report his location to the police. It would have made more sense if Donovan used this kid as a pawn for jobs of lower importance without giving him knowledge of their main base of operations, where the higher-ups operate. There's so much that could obviously go wrong with the way Donovan operates, and Donovan doesn't seem to care, and this will be a recurring problem throughout the series. We cut back to Spider-Man's action scene, and he devises a plan with Norman to stop the villains. I find it strange that Spider-Man is literally just standing there and watching these two hurt or kill these cops. Peter can clearly see that these cops are being attacked and just stands there while talking to Norman. Wouldn't it make more sense for him to save the cops and listen to Norman devise a plan? He doesn't strike me as someone who would, very nonchalantly watch a bunch of people get attacked by villains, seeing that he put himself on the line to help someone before he had powers, and later we see that he's willing to step in front of a laser blast to save a criminal. He eventually webs both of them and sits on the streetlight for a bit. Now keep in mind that when the speedster goes out of control, he starts smashing into cars and starts risking the safety of civilians nearby. While this is happening, Peter is literally just sitting there doing nothing to at least contain the situation, or tell these people to evacuate to ensure their safety. He just watches this happen instead of trying to web him to slow their momentum, shoot web lines like he did earlier in the fight, something to mitigate the damage. That's pretty much all I have to say about this episode. This one was even worse than the last one. I'm sitting at a 3 out of 10 for this episode. This episode starts to explore some of the ideas that Norman had in mind to improve Spider-Man's performance. The first one he presents to Peter is a night suit and a cape.
Now I think get off. Are those things supposed to help get me down? I am not a pinata.
There's so much wrong with this. For starters, when coming up with upgrades for Spider-Man, I was expecting something even minimally intelligent from Norman, considering he's highly skilled on a scientific and technical level. So we're really led to believe that this science genius with one of the biggest tech companies in the world decided to only provide Peter with a suit of armor and a cape that could easily get stuck. I suppose the armor is useful, but the cape is just a detriment. You don't even need to be a science genius to know this. You just need to watch an animated Pixar movie to know this is a dumb idea. And what's even worse worse about this scene is that Peter could break out of this easily. He has super strength. If he can stop 40-mile-per-hour cars, I think he can rip off a piece of cloth. And even ignoring that option, he could just use his legs to climb upwards to avoid these guys and fix his cape. And even if he couldn't do that, he could have just kicked these criminals since his legs are free. But I guess expecting Peter Parker of all people to be smart is asking a little too much. Okay, well maybe the next suit design will be more fitting for Peter. Peter immediately gets dropped into New York City with this flight suit instead of having this tested and trained for in a secret area. Not knowing how to fly while using flight tech is incredibly dangerous, which could not only kill Peter, but it would also render him useless to Norman's plan. And even if it didn't kill Peter, it could definitely result in Peter flying into random civilians at high speeds and end up killing them. And for that reason, I'd say the damage extends to Peter's character as well. He could have easily killed people with what he did here. It would also reflect really badly on Norman when he discusses his partnership with Spider-Man to Ross. Are we really led to believe that Norman Osborn is so stupid that he doesn't think to test dangerous tech while sending Peter out with them? Not to mention that this Oscorp tech could be stolen by anyone if Peter crashes and is knocked out, which is just a waste of his resources and money, and I don't think Norman wants his designs to be stolen by others.
What?
Peter almost killed someone because of a weapon that Norman didn't tell him was there or how to use it, nor does it require a confirmation before you use it. What next? Is Norman gonna hand Peter an army of killer drones and not include instructions before granting him access? What kind of reasonably intelligent person hands over a weapon to a child and thinks that not explaining what it is would work swimmingly for them? He almost bumps into these people on the street. Peter should straight up be telling Norman to tell him how to land the suit. He shouldn't be using it if he clearly can't control it.
Dude, are you sure you're even Spider-Man?
He almost hits a car, then actually gets hit by a car, then proceeds to use its flight anyway to reach Norman instead of climbing his way there, despite seeing how dangerous flight could be to himself and others.
If that means endangering myself, I'm okay with that, but you helping me could put you or the nice people at Oscorp in danger.
Peter kinda forgot about his own morals. At least the glider is a working option for Spider-Man, though I don't know why scaring a child means get rid of it. Peter can have a Spider-Man suit and have a glider just in case he runs out of webbing midair, or just to save webbing. While this is happening, Donovan randomly decides to push Lonnie around and complain about him doing his homework, because that's definitely how you inspire loyalty in a criminal organization. Like I said earlier, these people work for Donovan and have access to his main base of operations. Lonnie is less likely to rat him out or try to get back at him if he gives Lonnie reasons to be loyal. After all, that's what Donovan tries to establish in his gang. It'd be one thing if Lonnie actually did something that would anger Donovan. It's actually really smart in the Home trilogy, where the Vulture and Mysterio show general respect to their crew to ensure that they remain loyal, and only act out in anger when someone has actually screwed up big time and has actually put their operations at jeopardy, because that's what reasonably intelligent crime leaders would do, as opposed to expecting loyalty from people they mistreat. People who have access to their secrets could screw them over if they were in the mood. Another example of a similar idea done effectively is Hammerhead in the Spectacular Spider-Man. He obviously doesn't think very highly of Flint, he even considers him an idiot, but he acts respectful and well-mannered because that's how you inspire loyalty, or get others to do the work you want them to do. That's why they didn't write Hammerhead to be a cartoonish jackass to Flint in spite of looking down upon him.
And the big man's had his eye on you, Marco. There you go. You got your sand legs, your sand clothes. Hey, and now you're in color. You got power no one else got. Not even Spider-Man.
Donovan is a different story, however. Even setting aside my earlier example, Donovan sends Lonnie to pick up his food under his name, knowing that Lonnie could be jumped or followed. Lonnie gets mad about this, and Donovan just smiles without any surprise to what he's hearing.
I almost got jumped out there. And you knew it would happen, didn't you? Who was that woman?
Does he realize that if Lonnie has no reason to be loyal to him, he could just give up the location to the Scorpion Gang if he gets jumped? That would save his skin if he were being interrogated and Lonnie has lots of reasons to hate the gang anyway. This would be better if Lonnie wasn't allowed to know where his main base of operations is, but he does. And for that reason, he also could have been followed to the base and Donovan doesn't look concerned at all. He even mentions that Gargan tracks down people for a living.
The thing about Gargan is, he used to find people for a living, and now his go-to gal seen your face. And it wouldn't be too hard with you popping up all over the local sports page every week.
This just makes it even worse. Donovan knows of Lonnie from all the papers he's in. Lonnie is a public figure in the neighborhood. Why would he want Lonnie to be tied to his main base of operations when he could easily be tracked down by Gargan? Gargan just needs to go to his house and threaten his family to get Lonnie to give up the location of the 1/10th. Even in the situation where Lonnie knows the location, why not just have him pick up food under a different name? That way, that doesn't attract the attention from the Scorpion Gang and gives them no reason to follow Lonnie. Donovan has made his base incredibly vulnerable because he apparently doesn't know how to compartmentalize information in his group. If you're gonna treat one of your guys as a disposable pawn, that should be fine as long as they don't have crucial information that could hinder him. But that's not what Donovan did. Later on, Norman and Peter have a talk about why Norman is pushing him and what he needs Spider-Man to be.
We need more heroes than ever. Better heroes. We need heroes who will take accountability for their actions and live up to what they represent.
I'm scared I'm never gonna be good enough to live up to what you want from me.
I understand what the show is going for, but this doesn't carry a whole lot of weight considering what I've talked about earlier, like how Peter without his powers was already willing to stand up to someone who is essentially Venom to save someone's life, and thought to himself why he was given these powers, and concluded off-screen that he was given these powers to protect people, as if that's his purpose. And there wasn't a major failure on Peter's end that would have brought him to this point of self-doubt. This comes out of nowhere. They didn't have anything to set this up, so it doesn't carry any weight when Peter tells us he's scared and that he can't live up to what he represents. If Peter's self-doubt is to carry any weight or feel naturally built up to, there should at least be something he actually fails at. He already succeeded in all of his fights beforehand and didn't consider them failures, or show any lingering regret for anything he did in those battles. The only time he technically failed was when Norman gave him poorly designed suits, which Peter attributes to the design rather than his own personal failings. He doesn't present or perceive these failings as his own. Each and every time he remarks on the aftermath, he says it's the suit that's not working out. What makes this idea better executed in Spider-Man Far From Home is that when Peter feels self-doubt, it's tied to a failure. He feels he can't live up to Iron Man because he partially blames himself for not being good enough. And each time Peter's self-doubt grows, it's tied to a failure. Like when he gets scolded for putting his classmates in danger, he's shown to perceive that as a personal failure. The same can be said for when he realizes that he shouldn't have trusted Mysterio with the glasses, or when he gets tricked again before being hit by a train. So when Peter tells Happy he doesn't think he's good enough, that carries actual weight.
I don't know if that's me, Happy. I'm not Iron Man.
This line has meaning to it because the film deliberately showed Peter failing and him acknowledging those failures each time, so it actually feels naturally built up to when he expresses self-doubt. Spider-Man eventually gets an actual upgrade to his suit and saves a bunch of people in a fire. He notices one last person and is worried about what the fire will do to him.
I'm fireproof? I'm not.
Okay, so first of all, don't you think Norman would have talked to Peter on what his upgrades were before sending him out in the streets? Second of all, why didn't Peter just jump or swing over the fire if he didn't know he was fireproof? Was he expecting to burn himself? He stops for a pose randomly when someone is seconds away from burning to death? What kind of Spider-Man stops for a pose while people are in danger of burning to death?
I'm fireproof? I'm not.
Sheesh, what a grouch.
Can you imagine if Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man just randomly decided to flex his muscles in front of people before entering this building to save people? And then Peter swings back to Oscorp. Looks like someone's in there with Norman.
Is he?
I think he is.
But it was so awesome! We have a winner, Mr. Osborn.
Are you damaged?
He did. Kind of defeats the whole anonymous superhero thing.
How did Peter not notice Harry sitting right there? Does Peter not have eyes? He's right there in his view. This episode is a 2 out of 10, and I think a lot of this speaks for itself. The end of episode 4 introduces Doc Ock and brings us to the start of episode 5. Remember how I mentioned a positive of Doc Ock and how it was smart for him to conduct his sales remotely for his own protection? Well, this episode shows us that he was apparently going to run his deal with Unicorn's group at the same place he manufactures his tech. This is Otto's main base of operations, and he allows these criminals to know the location and potentially reveal it to the police if they got arrested and are offered shortened sentences to reveal where they got their weapons from. And he lets Unicorn enter his base as well. Just imagine if Unicorn shot Otto in the face and decided to steal everything for herself. Even if she didn't want to go that extreme, Otto turns his back on her, and she could easily sneak a piece of tech in her pocket so she can just walk away with that for free. Almost like it was smarter for him to remotely transfer his tech and retrieve the money. Later, Unicorn breaks out the rest of her crew. Spider-Man gets alerted to this and heads over. Now before we talk about this fight, I just want to draw attention to this real quick. Just so we're clear, all it takes to defeat Unicorn, who is a regular human, is to take the helmet off. That's it. So if Spider-Man takes her seriously as a threat, given that the helmet can literally slice through people, he should be able to just yank it off and end the conflict immediately so no one gets hurt. He sits down to talk to Unicorn for a while, for so long that Unicorn is able to charge her weapon and fire a singular shot. This is inexcusably moronic. All Spider-Man had to do was shoot a web and take the helmet off. Yet he doesn't do that, and allows her the opportunity to keep shooting lasers in this populated area just because he wanted to joke around.
I'm not one to give unsolicited advice, but trust me, a little yoga and some anger management classes will probably help with that whole firing lasers from your forehead thing you got going.
Can you not talk for a second?
Aw, a fan. I'll tell you what, you surrender, I'll make sure you get a signed photo.
I'm glad somebody has time to enjoy themselves when there's so much at stake.
And even on a physical level, Spider-Man should be mopping the floor with Unicorn. Unicorn is only stated to be a physically gifted athlete on file. This is no superhuman. Yet when Spider-Man and Unicorn go hand to hand, apparently Spider-Man is the one who is slowing down. Apparently he can be kicked away so easily despite Spider-Man having the reaction time to dodge lasers and the strength to stop speeding cars. Blocking this kick should be fodder to him. What's even worse is that Unicorn turns her back on Spider-Man. He could web the helmet off to prevent her from shooting anybody, but instead he lets her shoot the laser and almost kill these people. He shoots webs to catch this car, but not to web the helmet off before the laser charges up. Apparently Spider-Man can't react to a normal person running up to him for a punch, despite managing that just fine in the first episode. And I straight up don't believe that any of her punches or kicks should hurt him despite him taking pain. Setting aside the fact that he's Spider-Man, he's wearing armor. These lasers can tear through cars. Spider-Man's suit is not torn through when shot at, so recovering from these blows should be really easy for Peter.
Now that everyone's gone, you've got my full attention.
Full attention to what? If anything, civilians being nearby should give him more reason to react defensively when attacked when he needs to be active to help them. But it's not like she has his full attention afterwards either. Spider-Man is literally just standing there and holding Unicorn's fist, and then she turns her back on Spider-Man. This is when you take the helmet off. Peter actively watched this guy walk to the middle of the road instead of taking the one second it would take to remove the helmet. Peter watches Unicorn activate the helmet instead of forcing it off. He literally lets go of Unicorn's hand so she's free to aim at this guy instead of keeping his grip and taking the helmet off. And what's even dumber is that instead of taking off the helmet, he decides to try beating the laser in a race to the criminal so he can take the attack for him. All of that instead of taking a goddamn helmet off, and of course, not releasing his grip on a dangerous villain. It's such a dumb plan for Unicorn too, because Spider-Man wouldn't have this opportunity if she didn't turn her back on him and just activated the laser in front of his face. So you're telling me that this dumb criminal who was literally made fun of for being stupid in the previous episode managed to take the helmet off from behind, yet the intelligent superhero with spider powers didn't think to do this.
This guy's a fraud.
But then, Unicorn grabs the helmet again, and Spider-Man remembers that he can web that away. Then he shoots a singular web, and Unicorn is defeated. And that's all I have for this episode. This is a 3 out of 10. In the next episode, Lonnie and his brother have a talk about how Lonnie is stuck with the 1/10th. A little strange how we literally just established that their parents are home and are nearby Lonnie, and we literally see Lonnie and his little brother argue across each end of the stairs, and they're definitely not whispering. Not exactly a great way of maintaining secrecy. Outside of that, I think their conversation is good, and I think it does some solid work to establish the motivations of Lonnie's brother. A security breach is then reported at Oscorp, which causes Norman to call Peter. He arrives and sees a hole in the window to indicate a point of entry. Okay, immediate problem. Why doesn't Norman leave his office on Do Not Disturb mode when he's out for the night? If he did that, then Daredevil couldn't have broken through the glass. I'm not even sure how he would get in if it were locked down this tightly. Norman has really important secrets on his computer, so if he had a protocol for secrecy and security, then why not use it when his office is unattended? Why not activate it the moment the breach was reported, so that Daredevil is trapped the moment he starts extracting files from Norman's computer? He has a protocol to alert him of any breaches, but no protocols to respond to said breaches. And then Spider-Man spots Daredevil, and they start playing the Daredevil theme while having him pose for the camera. This entire sequence is done for fan service and jangling keys. I say this because this scene doesn't actually add anything to the central plotline. He just comes there to steal some secrets off Norman's computer, hints at Peter that Norman is hiding something, and leaves. Otto is already someone that Peter and Norman would investigate because Norman was already doing research on where the weapons came from and suspected Otto Octavius, who they were both going to track down through gamma radiation, whether or not Daredevil made an appearance. We already know that Osborn is hiding something because we're not idiots, and this does nothing to facilitate any doubts from Peter or how he realizes not to trust him. And we never actually got a follow-up on what Daredevil found from Oscorp or what he was planning to do with it. The plot of the season doesn't address this, so this doesn't actually add anything to the central narrative, yet this episode dedicates a whole subplot to this because Daredevil is cool and we love the Netflix show. It adds nothing of substance to the story, and ultimately serves no purpose. Contrast that with the 90s series, where Daredevil's inclusion is a major focus and facilitates much of the major plot beats in the saga, and we get significant character moments that explore Matt Murdock and develop his relationship with Spider-Man. So his inclusion actually serves a purpose in the story rather than being there to jangle keys or aura farm. This is just shallow fan service. Also, Daredevil is straight up out of character in the scene. He knows that Peter's young and is trying to do the right thing.
I tell you're young, you're trying to do the right thing. But this isn't it. I'm trying to help you understand what's really going on. Osborn is hiding something.
Okay, so what is he hiding? What evidence did you extract to find this? Daredevil knows that Spider-Man is trying to do the right thing, so shouldn't he start the conversation by informing Spider-Man that Norman Osborn is hiding something and exactly what that is? Keep in mind that Daredevil is making several quips and comebacks much earlier in the fight, so he definitely does have the opportunity to speak with Spider-Man. Even if he has to defend himself during the conversation, he can still just tell him that Norman Osborn is hiding something and that he has evidence of it. Even if this doesn't guarantee that Spider-Man will listen, it's better to try, especially with how dangerous it could be for Osborn to have a superhero serving his agenda. And depending on how bad it is, I think it would be within Peter's character to listen. I mean, I couldn't tell you what Daredevil found because this season can't even complete its own plotlines. It's all just set up for the future, I guess. It's all about setup. Also, Spider-Man should not have lost this fight. I do expect Daredevil to put up a fight, but tossing a stick at his head would not do the job. Ignoring how durable Spider-Man himself is, his armor is enough to resist lasers, whereas Daredevil is obviously not trying to kill Spider-Man. And even if Daredevil tossed his sticks as hard as he could, he's not matching the force of these lasers, so this knockout is just a nerf. And then Peter and Norman talk about this while under the impression that Otto is after them. There's a hole in the window, yet Peter is okay with unmasking himself in this room that Daredevil just broke into. For all he knows, Otto could have had a hidden spy drone around. Whatever happened to Do Not Disturb mode being used to talk about Spider-Man, especially while Osborn is under threat of being exposed?
This protocol is in place so we can talk about Spider-Man.
This episode felt like a huge waste of time. So much was dedicated to a subplot that leads nowhere and adds nothing. The most done with it was trying to progress Harry and Nico, which is fine in itself, but it's surrounded by a sea of bad writing. This episode is a 3 out of 10 as well. We then get to episode 7. Peter and Norman try to track down Otto by looking at the energy left behind his weapons, which they picked up as gamma radiation. Why does Otto needlessly use gamma radiation for the villain's tech when this could get them poisoned and killed? Recall that these are based on old Oscorp designs. They don't need to use gamma to power them, and there's no way Otto couldn't be creative and smart enough in choosing better power sources. This would give Otto's tech a bad reputation in the crime world, which would affect his sales. If Speed Demon's tech caused him to get sick and die, no criminal would want to buy from Otto. This would also make his tech look poorly designed, despite wanting to be seen as a genius to the world. Also, this is a more unique power source that organizations like Oscorp could track easily with spectrometers. Otto didn't even think to use various or more common power sources to mitigate any ties to his base. He left a pattern behind when using designs owned by his old enemy, who owns a big tech corporation with countless resources. You'd think someone as smart as Otto would have considered this. Later on, Nico and Harry start to work out their issues. Harry teaches her to drive and Nico gets annoyed by some random racer trying to annoy them, which causes her to engage in this car race despite having little experience driving. And while I can see how it's within Nico's character, I'd go as far to say it's vehemently out of character for Harry to enable Nico. Harry is a well-known celebrity, and people can easily catch this race on video with this recognizable car. Norman would absolutely be mad at him for this, and Harry just needs to tell Nico to stop in order to prevent this race from causing any trouble, whether it be an accident that kills themselves or another pedestrian. Harry is shown to be against the idea at first because Nico doesn't know how to drive very well.
You really shouldn't do this. You're just learning how to drive.
Remember that stop sign?
Harry knows how dangerous this is, but doesn't put the foot down and tell her to stop. Afterwards, Nico nearly crashes into a car, which nearly kills whoever is in that car, herself, and Harry. At least one of them could have died from that. And in spite of almost killing someone after Harry said this was a bad idea, Harry turns on track mode to go faster, just because Nico asked if there was a way to go faster.
Does this thing go any faster?
Only if you turn on track mode.
Then turn on track mode!
So Harry just saw that they almost killed someone by doing this race, and his instinct is to make the car go faster instead of telling Nico to stop the car when he already knew this was a bad idea.
You shouldn't have done that with your car.
Awesome! Oh, man! That was so sick!
It was awesome that they nearly killed people and put themselves at risk of legal trouble. It's really weird how Harry's character just flips for no reason. And what's even stranger is that the show doesn't seem to recognize how irresponsible this is, seeing that Harry celebrates it and even encourages Nico to use it again just to avoid people. If anything, this could serve as an interesting learning moment for these characters that we're following, but we don't even really get anything out of this. At most, it made me feel less sympathetic for Nico as a character because she's willing to endanger random people on the road. To see Peter get chewed out for keeping secrets to protect people as if he was in the wrong, but also seeing the show gloss over Nico almost killing people puts a bit of a sour taste in my mouth as a viewer. We then cut back to the 1/10 and why is Pearl allowed to just enter the building? From the perspective of the 1/10, she shouldn't even have this location or know what goes on in there because she's not part of the gang and therefore isn't loyal to them. What happens if Pearl sees all the weapons and money within this crime gang that the police are actively looking for? She can clearly tell that these are a bunch of gangsters and could easily call the police on them. And that's assuming she isn't undercover or anything, which means that she could have a wire on her and collect information on record. It's profoundly stupid that they just allow people into their base. It's like these people operate with only 1/10 the intelligence of the average human being. I also couldn't believe this when I saw it, but one of the gang members is actually the same guy as the streamer who publicly assaulted Harry with his other group of criminals. I'm not kidding. It's the same guy.
Check out our next victim in his dumbass costume.
Wait, hold on. Next victim? So you're telling me that the 1/10 intelligence not only stream themselves trying to rob and assault a celebrity, but the 1/10 intelligence streams their victims on the regular? And these kinds of idiots are allowed to know the main base of operations of the 1/10 intelligence? They're just casually loading guns in front of her, flexing the fact that they have illegal weapons on them. What if she's on a family plan, genius? Pearl reveals that Lonnie's brother is the one who added the location to Pearl and that he told her everything.
I am not an idiot. Dre told me everything.
Does that include the part where these people threaten you or your family if you cross them? Because if so, revealing that Lonnie's brother was the snitch is quite literally the dumbest thing she could do here. She straight up put Lonnie's brother at risk of facing punishment for this. And I think Lonnie's turn is done really badly, and it starts to shine in this episode. In an earlier episode, it ended with Lonnie being respected by the gang, and he seemed satisfied with that. I found that a bit odd considering Lonnie would have every reason to hate this gang for endangering his little brother and forcing him to stay in the gang, to the point of ruining his life and relationships. His way of living is made far worse by the 1/10 intelligence, so gaining their respect shouldn't mean much to him, but I was curious to see where it would lead. But in this episode, they show that Lonnie is truly committed to the gang, to the point where he puts himself at risk to help Donovan instead of prioritizing Pearl's safety and ensuring she makes it out. This is at minimum an opportunity and excuse for Lonnie to escape, and if he wanted to, he could alert the police and report this gang for what they've been doing. He would get his life back and fix his relationships, but instead, he almost dies to save a guy who did nothing but ruin his life and his connections, which is seriously rushing his turn to villainy that they're going for. I really don't believe he would prioritize Donovan's safety over Pearl's escape. He had no idea Spider-Man would show up and save them. And there are more problems with Lonnie to go over, but we'll get to that in later episodes. Spider-Man gets in a fight with Scorpion where he's dodging him constantly. We see that he dodges his tail without even looking, but then when he does look, he just stares and doesn't move out of the way despite the fact he's capable of doing this without looking. So when Peter needs to look for advice on how to deal with the villain, he needs to be told to use the environment.
He's not letting me reach him with that tail.
Use your environment, Peter.
Funny because he literally did this earlier in the fight already. Also funny because he literally did this in his first fight scene in the show. Twice. Seems a little odd that he has to be told by Norman to think of this. Later on, Scorpion grabs this metal pillar and pulls it down to crush Spider-Man. Despite the fact he could dodge lasers, and has dodged Scorpion's tail itself several times, even without looking, he apparently can't dodge Scorpion's tail, slowly pulling down this pillar. He decides to catch it and leave himself open for an attack, instead of just moving out of the way. This is what causes Spider-Man to get stabbed and beaten by the end, because Spider-Man is a moron. And then Norman sends a glider to pick up Spider-Man, yet for some reason doesn't ensure that Scorpion gets stopped as well. Keep in mind that Norman has connections to Ross thanks to their business deal, and has been able to get him to call Iron Man on Otto in the next episode. If Norman could send a glider to pick up Spider-Man, why not send a surveillance drone to ensure he keeps tabs on Scorpion, or send the police the location, or send Iron Man there by contacting Ross? This would reflect well on Osborn because he presented the merits of his surveillance tech during his business proposal.
I have big ways to expand on this project. Ways for Oscorp to provide cutting-edge security solutions worldwide.
And that's the end of the episode. This one was especially catastrophic and has brought this show to an even lower point. This episode is a 2 out of 10. This episode starts with Peter recovering after the fight. Norman prepared an alibi for Aunt May on where Peter was, though it's weird he didn't think to do the same to explain any of his injuries. He didn't talk to Peter about what cover story he'd go with to explain the injuries, even though he really should if he's agreeing to help Peter cover his identity. And what's Peter doing crawling on the ceiling when he's within many people's view? It's not like he's doing some important mission, he's just leaving a medical facility. Peter arrives home, and May starts questioning what happened to him. Peter talks about his failures to live up to his responsibilities, and how this makes him feel weak. I do appreciate that the scene tries to have an honest conversation, and shows us Peter struggling, as opposed to just telling us about it after it was resolved off screen. If we had more of these kinds of moments in the show to support Peter's growth, it would have worked out better in execution. This is the 8th episode out of 10, and this is the first time we're actually shown Peter's vulnerabilities, as opposed to being told of them, or having moments of progression skipped off screen. I still feel that this problem is present with Aunt May in the scene, and only adds on to what I talked about earlier, about how she isn't given any substance as a character. She says that she was scared when they lost Uncle Ben, and it was just them two.
I was scared too, you know? When it became just you and me.
But we never see that vulnerability, we're just told of it. We never see her grow out of it. We just see the aftermath of it, where Aunt May doesn't show any vulnerability because she's already past it. She isn't given much else to do as a character besides offer Peter the correct advice. She never shows struggles in the show, despite being a single parent who suffered the loss of her husband. She doesn't have any character traits that are explored in any depth, outside of the fact that she gives Peter uplifting advice from time to time and cares about him, which is something you can find in any flat or one-dimensional mentor figure. That's just the bare minimum. I guess the big problem here is that despite how prominent she is in the show and in Peter's life, there's nothing shown to us that gives Aunt May any humanity. There are no weaknesses shown to us to counterbalance her character strengths. She feels more like a vehicle to push Peter's character, rather than a human character.
I know Ben could have been your role model. He just deserves someone like him to talk to.
I don't know what to make of this line because as far as the show has established, Ben was a good man that Peter looked up to, so Ben already was his role model. So what is she talking about when she says he could have been his role model? He already was.
I have a father. His name was Ben Parker.
If Ben wasn't a role model to Peter, then what was he to Peter? What was their relationship and why should I care about it? You see, the whole skipping the origin thing was at least acceptable in Civil War and Homecoming, because they were at least banking on us assuming that they knew how the origin went and are standing by that. Although it may not have been ideal how they presented it, they at least had that concept in mind and stuck by it. This isn't even the case in the show, so I'm more so just confused on what they're even trying to communicate with this version of Ben. And if he's not the role model that presented the great responsibility message he's known for, then I'm losing reasons to care about this guy every time they mention him. We then shift back to the Doc Ock plotline, and we just see him eating chips, and the show makes jokes about him playing video games. And this is a wider issue I have with Otto in the show. Norman has this expository dialogue about how Otto is spiteful towards the world, and he believes he's owed something for his intelligence. He's someone that is so prideful and egotistical that he can't even be satisfied when he achieves his end goal. They go out of their way to tell us these things about Otto's character, but we never actually see this through his actions. There's nothing he does in the show that's remotely sinister or even spiteful enough that gives me reason to be intimidated intimidated by him and believe that he could be a serious threat, especially with how much the show likes to make fun of him. The entire plotline with these villains is building up to Otto being the mastermind behind it all. And it's all underwhelming, and Otto has nothing about him as a character that's worth investing in, despite all of this build-up surrounding him. What amplifies this problem is that Otto has this goofy montage of him defeating the cops, where he's further treated as a joke, and that just builds up to Iron Man showing up and ending the entire plotline with Otto being the mastermind behind all the weapons. Before Spider-Man can even meet Otto Octavius, they have Iron Man swoop in and jail him, putting an end to this plotline that they've dedicated so much setup and build-up for. It's like that plotline just self-deleted itself at random, and as expected, this scene has a lot of ridiculous problems in it. Otto gets arrested by the cops for his gamma-powered weapons and gets completely surrounded. Okay, first problem already. They know that Otto is behind these really dangerous weapons that required Spider-Man to save the day, while the cops were constantly struggling against them. So who's to say that Otto doesn't have any of these weapons on him or any precautions in place that make use of his uniquely dangerous weapons? Why didn't they start by sending Iron Man after him if he's working under the Accords? For some reason, before Otto has even stopped the cops, he decides to walk around where they can see him and shoot him since he's the one controlling these weapons. He almost gets shot because of this. I thought Otto was meant to be smart. He presses a button to fire a bunch of shots, which makes me question why he didn't start with that before walking out in the open and almost killing himself. Afterwards, his grand plan to stop these people is to walk in front of the spotlight and drop a ball to make a really loud noise. What's his plan if they just shot him as soon as they saw him? He already started attacking them from seemingly the flip of a switch on his gloves. They have every right to shoot him in self-defense. That ball in his hand could be any kind of weapon, yet instead of shooting him, they just watch him drop it when that's more than likely to be part of his plan. Otto's plan would have failed if they just shot him like they should have. Another cop walks up to him and watches Otto walk away instead of shooting him when they already know he can just control these tentacles with the snap of his fingers, which he can seemingly command without having to say anything or control them constantly. And then when Otto walks outside with all these people surrounding him, he acts like he's already won despite having no clear plan of stopping any of them. His arms are confined to the inside, so what could he actually do to stop them from shooting him? Why is Ross in front of these cops pointing their guns at Otto, which literally blocks their line of fire? If Otto wanted to, he could grab Ross and take him hostage. Otto's plan is contingent on the cops being morons, and to his temporary luck, they are.
Oh, well, that's convenient.
Let's consider what Otto could have done if he wanted an effective escape contingency. Well, he has the means to create speedster tech if he ever needed to, so just do exactly that. Imagine if he used that to rush the money into his bag, bring some more resources, and escape the scene faster than any other vehicles can move. He also could have created a copy of the unicorn laser for himself, so he could blast anyone in his way. But instead, he settles for a loud ball that he drops while he's being held at gunpoint after already attacking the cops, and walking outside with cops surrounding the building with no ways of retaliating. And to be honest, even if Iron Man showed up, the laser would still give Iron Man a hard time, and Otto could use the speedster tech to escape if he had to. Now keep in mind that Otto's plan in selling these weapons was for the world to see him as a genius.
My name should be held in higher regard than Stark Osborn.
Will be.
But when we think deeper about the tech he had access to, I have even more questions. Don't you think technology that can literally make him a speedster would be useful in stealing some resources or designs from Oscorp? Or even targeting Osborn himself and enacting revenge on him? Or targeting his son to use his leverage against Osborn to get what he wants? He has a lot of options to essentially overthrow Oscorp and knock Norman down a peg, yet he seems to have no plans for that in the show. He also is shown to be impatient about it when talking to Vincent, so I expect some kind of plan to overthrow Norman and expose him as a fraud. After all, Otto believes Norman is someone who leeches off people's ideas and steals them. But apparently, he'd rather settle for risking a trail that leads to him and doing nothing to actually get back at Osborn or prove he's superior to him. Later on, we return to Lonnie's character assassination arc. Just recall what I said earlier about how the 1/10th intelligence has done nothing but ruin Lonnie's life and his relationships, and he's only in the gang because they put his little brother in danger and jeopardized his future, so he's only doing this out of necessity. And Donovan has shown that he's willing to disrespect Lonnie out of nowhere and even send him to possibly get jumped or killed by enemy gangs. Yet when Pearl literally tells Lonnie that he could leave the gang because they won't go after him, he suddenly believes he owes these people as if they'll always have his back.
Everyone in that gang is probably running for it now. You can finally get out too, Lon. They won't come after you.
I'm not worried about that. I can't abandon the 110th.
You don't owe them, Lonnie.
Yeah, I do.
Why does he think he owes them? They've done nothing but ruin his life, and they never cared to give him a choice on the matter. They didn't even seem sorry about it. They're okay with using Lonnie as a pawn to possibly get jumped. Lonnie only joined this gang out of necessity to protect his brother. Why does he believe he owes them? Why would he prioritize these people over Pearl and his own family? Why would he change? Lonnie is thoroughly destroyed as a character, and it doesn't end in this episode. Peter goes to Norman later on, and Harry is present there. Harry doesn't want to leave because he wants to be part of the conversation. It seems like the show is trying to touch upon the parental neglect element between Norman and Harry's relationship, but nothing is actually done with this to build conflict or add to Harry's characterization. It seems like they just dropped a couple of hints of it, but they did nothing to add to the drama of the story. I already think that Harry is a really thin character in the show, but this just adds on to it. The most we've gotten from him is that Peter is the only person who feels like a sincere friend to him, but that's about it. It's not bad or anything, it's just a flat portrayal of Harry. I don't know why this room isn't on Do Not Disturb mode when they're talking about Spider-Man. It seems the show is routinely forgetting that they've established this in an earlier episode. Someone even shows up randomly in the conversation because Norman forgot to lock down the room as he usually does. In this conversation, Norman tries to tell Peter that he needs to stop holding back and that he needs to push for respect. I do appreciate what it's going for because this seems like the first time they're actually trying to show a significant weakness in Peter Parker. Why are you shouting your gang's name out loud in the streets when the 110th Intelligence was literally in the news and we know the police are after the gang?
Go get him, Tiger.
Whoa! He stole that girl's catchphrase!
I found you, faker!
This episode is another 2 out of 10, and we're not even at the worst episodes in the series. This episode starts with Norman confronting Otto in prison, and basically rubbing it in his face that he's the reason Otto's in jail, alongside the fact that he now owns the designs that Otto had in his lab. In isolation, I think the confrontation works fine, but this is a product of Otto's plotline just self-deleting and having no real connection or relevance to the protagonist or the overall plot of the story. It's a rushed side plot that ultimately leads nowhere, outside of establishing that Norman Osborn and Otto Octavius hate each other, and to set up for Otto becoming Doc Ock later on. But that's really all this is here, setup without payoff. We don't even know for sure what happened between them that caused a split at Oscorp, and I'm definitely not trusting Norman's side of the story. We never did get to see Otto's side of it, and maybe we will in the future, but this just kind of proves my point that this subplot is just all set up without any payoffs. We cut to the 110th Intelligence as they're preparing to steal from Oscorp's transport. They see cops are present to secure the technology, and Donovan states that he intends to attack them.
We need to step up and get rid of these fools.
Get rid of them?
These boys in blue are the only thing standing between us and getting what we need.
But picking a fight with the police? You gotta stop before someone else gets hurt!
So, they've been trying to build up Lonnie's downfall to become a villain by having him join a crime gang, but they also have it so Lonnie all of a sudden isn't okay with the 110th Intelligence because they're okay with hurting the police. First of all, this is a crime gang where they would inherently be up against the police. They stash a bunch of illegal weapons for when they have to fight. Are you telling me that Lonnie didn't think that a crime gang would have shaky relations with the police? Second of all, this gang was willing to endanger children like his own brother and bring them into gang fights. Now all of a sudden, Lonnie is worried about people getting hurt? Third of all, Lonnie has had experience with the cops being racist to him as shown in the first episode. If you want to put Lonnie down on a villain path, why suddenly make him sympathetic towards an organization that is corrupt and has allowed racist people in positions of power? That's such an odd choice. Because he's a victim of racist cops, I'd expect him to be more spiteful towards the police, and if he already goes into this gang knowing people could be hurt, why are the cops of all people enough for him to rethink his life as opposed to seeing this as a necessary consequence of getting the job done? Again, he's in a crime gang. Something else I find odd about this transfer is that we only see cops around this material, which was used to create highly dangerous weapons, and this is a city with numerous superhumans or people with advanced tech that can overpower the police. Shouldn't someone like Iron Man show up for the transfer to ensure its security? Don't get me wrong, at least they have some form of security for the truck transfer, but in the world they're set in, especially in the city, this is too little, and I think Norman would expect much higher security for this. The Scorpion gang shows up, and Donovan's first instinct is to send the 110th Intelligence against them all at once. First of all, no. Even if it was just the Scorpion there and nobody else, they don't have any chance of beating him. His tail would just slam right through them before any of them could touch him. They literally saw this happen at their home base. Why wouldn't they retreat and let Spider-Man handle it? They could even steal some stuff from the truck while Spider-Man deals with Scorpion, and at most they'd have to fist fight Scorpion's gang, which is better for them because at least Spider-Man is the one dealing with Scorpion and not the gang. I also don't know why they don't have any guns at this point. You can justify it earlier in the show because they were just intending to fight each other and they didn't want to attract attention from the police or anything, but they're literally attacking the police in this scene, so there's no excuse for them not having guns. And then Spider-Man just watches them clash. Instead of webbing up a bunch of the gang members, he watches Scorpion literally use his tail against these people when that gives him an immediate opportunity to kill them. I get that they're going for the idea that Peter is initially too scared to fight Scorpion, but my main issue is that he literally sees that these people are on the brink of death, and this always pushes someone to act much quicker even if they are scared to make a decision. How you act in the heat of the moment is more indicative of someone's character, and what we saw in episode 1 is that despite being scared of this giant symbiote creature, he tried to distract it when this could harm himself and his aunt. That was on instinct before he got his powers. He now has the power to save people in immediate danger and already expected to face Scorpion again, as he was already planning to find him and stop him. So with that context, it's really odd to me that he's just watching these people almost get killed, but that doesn't pressure him enough into stepping in and saving them. Donovan sees that his guys are losing. Don't really know what he expected, considering he decided to charge first directly at Scorpion. At that point, he decides to retreat, and this convinces Lonnie to turn against Donovan for the rest of the season. I really don't see how Lonnie is surprised by this, considering Donovan is willing to sell out his own gang members to get jumped, as shown earlier in the season. He's willing to take people's lives away from them just so they can work for him. That's the whole reason he stepped in for his brother. This is just another case of Lonnie's character being monumentally confusing, with morals that have the consistency of sand. Tombstone gets his powers because he went digging around the Oscorp truck, and somehow accidentally dropping a briefcase opens it and releases a dangerous chemical to anyone nearby. I assume they would have locked the briefcase before the transport. I assume the briefcase would have been reinforced to prevent the chemical from being exposed to anyone, but apparently not, which makes it really nonsensical how Tombstone gets his powers. Spider-Man gets Scorpion to shock himself and fall over. It seems like his spider sense took another vacation since Scorpion is able to grab him from behind with no warning. While Spider-Man is getting choked by Scorpion, he struggles repeatedly with his arms. Don't know why he doesn't try kicking his way out of this since his legs are entirely free. But then Lonnie saves Spider-Man and they reveal that he's now indestructible and super strong, giving him the opportunity to help Spider-Man in the fight. The payoff was pretty cool, and it's nice to see Lonnie act as how he should in helping Spider-Man, though it's unfortunate how many problems there were beforehand. They knocked down Scorpion, but for some reason, Spider-Man doesn't layer webbing onto Scorpion to ensure he stays down. Remember, he seemed to have beaten Scorpion in an earlier episode, yet he broke out of all that webbing. In the same episode, he knocked him out temporarily by shocking him, yet he came back up soon afterwards. So with that context, not even webbing him up and turning their backs on him is really stupid of Spider-Man. It's just another case of making Spider-Man look like an idiot for no good reason. This is what gets Tombstone trapped by rubble, which by the way, I don't believe this would have held him for long, because he can literally contend with Scorpion's tail, which has contended with Spider-Man despite all his strength. Lonnie can't even be hurt by Scorpion's tail. He should have been out of the rubble straight away. It seems like they forced him out of the fight, so Peter believes that Lonnie is dead and therefore wants to kill Scorpion to allow their parallel to No Way Home happen. But it already feels forced because Peter has no reason to believe Lonnie is even dead, and he didn't even want to kill Scorpion beforehand when he knocked him out the 2 other times. So Peter already has a weak motivation to try killing Scorpion. He suddenly wants to get revenge on him for dropping rubble on someone indestructible, and that's what gets him to start listening to what Norman said about not holding back. This is what pushes Peter over the edge.
Dude, are you sure you're even Spider-Man?
That's not just unbelievable and contrived, but that's also deeply underwhelming. At least in No Way Home, the choice between killing or saving the villains was a huge part of the story, and was the setup for when Toby has to stop him from killing Norman, and he had a way better motivation to lose himself. His aunt died, and the Green Goblin laughed at him for it. In this show, Scorpion dropped rubble on someone indestructible. How is that a compelling reason for Peter to be pushed over the edge? It's entirely shallow and feels like a really forced reference to No Way Home, and it's ridiculous that Lonnie is the one to tell Peter to stop. Why him? Lonnie was never some mentor figure to Peter. He's the one who joined a crime gang and is on the path to becoming a villain. Not to mention that Lonnie literally saw someone in the 110th Intelligence get killed when they're supposed to be loyal to one another and have each other's backs. Peter saw an indestructible guy get trapped by rubble. Lonnie saw Scorpion kill someone in his gang. So from a narrative point of view, it strikes me as odd to have the developing supervillain be the one to stop Peter from going too far instead of Peter thinking about people people like Aunt May and Uncle Ben. It's just another element of this payoff that makes it shallow and it doesn't really sell it for me. It really doesn't help that they seriously damage Peter's character right after this moment. The Scorpion gang walks away to their cars, implying they're about to leave. These people need to be held accountable for the fact that they're complicit in murder and tried to kill people. The 1/10th Intelligence also needs to be held accountable for the fact they nearly ran into people and crashed into cop cars just to steal dangerous technology. Some of them are even smiling as they bump into the truck driver. Their antics almost got Nico killed, but in spite of this, Spider-Man swings away and lets all of them escape on their own. He literally looked the other way for people who almost caused carnage on the road, just so he can swing over to Nico and talk with her in an open alley while he's unmasked. He literally put the city at risk of more casualties due to a gang war, just so he can talk to Nico about their problems. You're saying the lives of a city of strangers are more important than a school friend?
All those casualties will be forgotten.
I can't ever look the other way again. Let's finish this. Now that's spider strength!
I also want to point out that Spider-Man never even talks to Lonnie about why he turned to gang life, nor does he try to talk him out of it and show him that he has more of a choice in life. He literally just leaves and never talks to him again. This episode is a 1 out of 10. This was catastrophic, and we're just now talking about the finale, which is even worse.
What are you writing?
The final chapter.
So Peter's running late for class. His model is busted, though their presentation is saved. Really weird how Pearl doesn't question Peter on what happened to it until she gets an answer. Peter doesn't have an answer when she first asks about it, so I'd expect her to question it or even be annoyed that he has no explanation for jeopardizing their project. What's the point of trying to create the struggle for Peter if he's not going to face significant consequences for it amongst the people who don't know his secrets? Later on, this episode brings us to Oscorp, where Norman starts revealing his grand plan to his interns and other staff members who are not in on this at all. So casually, Norman just reveals that he's creating a space portal that can bring you to outer space in an instant, and plans to test all of this right in front of them.
There are beings that can traverse space in an instant. Now, we can too.
Each of those events caused massive amounts of destruction, Norman. You have to think about what you're inviting here.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially under the Sokovia Accords, the government wouldn't just allow Norman to open this portal all the way to space in the middle of New York City. Every time that happened in the MCU, destruction followed. That's in fact what motivated the Sokovia Accords. Unchecked actions leading to destruction. And Norman's just revealing all of this to his staff and interns who can report this to law enforcement. Why would he expect them to be happy to hear that their intern projects are being used in a potentially destructive manner?
None of that matters. We didn't agree to this.
That's a good point. Nobody here agreed to this when they signed their paperwork. They're just jumping headfirst doing this experiment when staying silent on any of this would make their interns and staff members complicit in this illegal experiment. What happens if Oscorp gets sued for this? Why did Norman suddenly turn into the 1/10th Intelligence? He's supposed to be the one keeping secrets because he knows the legal consequences of if they get leaked. Why do they need to know about this experiment? What is his end goal if this even works in his favor? To tell the world that he did this illegal experiment against the Sokovia Accords? This could get his company shut down. This is beyond idiotic.
What the fuck is happening here?
And then Doctor Strange shows up randomly because he somehow knew what they were doing? If they actually opened the portal, I'd understand how he could be alerted, but nothing happened yet. How does Strange know to go to this specific place? What alerted him to arrive at this specific moment? He just does and they move on. So Strange arrives and tells Norman not to continue the experiment.
On behalf of the sorcerers of the world, I'm putting an end to this.
So then, do it. You have all the magic. You can use it to dismantle or break apart Norman's power sources so that they can't even turn on the machine. What use is there to argue with Norman on this instead of just shutting it down and telling him the problem?
The only threat here is that thing!
So, destroy it. Norman has already come off as delusional or dishonest to Strange. He's clearly disobedient.
Security! Handle him!
Doctor Strange, the master of the mystic arts, gets defeated by sonic cannons. This guy can create force fields, he has shields, he has a cape that can fly around and disable the machine or stop anyone from turning it on, but it does nothing.
No, Mr. Osborn, maybe you should listen to the magic doctor.
Here's an idea, maybe run up to the machine and shut it down by force. Pull the plug, disable it. Peter literally believes Doctor Strange and Dr. Connors' concerns about how this could immediately endanger their planets, but he just stands there and lets it happen when he knows this could be catastrophic. It doesn't get any better for Strange. Strange can use magic to knock people out in an instant. He does this to Oscorp security. Don't know why he didn't lead with that when Norman was clearly disobedient. And even when the portal does get opened, Strange literally just floats there watching the portal stay open before the symbiote creature shows up. Yet Strange could have knocked out the scientists and pulled the plug to the machine, or sliced it with his portals. And even when a symbiote creature shows up, he doesn't create a portal in front of the space portal to prevent the creature from escaping. Why doesn't Norman have any kind of protective barrier when literally opening a portal to space? Imagine if some space debris flew in and hit someone. Strange tries to go up close to the symbiote creature instead of opening a portal to send it back to space. Why is Peter just watching this fight between them instead of suiting up as quickly as possible? Why is Strange still using a sword on this creature? He knows how to use those portals, he can easily send this creature back to space. Also, seeing that he's willing to use a sword against this creature, this tells me that he's willing to kill in combat, so why not cut this alien in half with a portal? So the portal only gets shut down because Strange accidentally damaged its power source and caused its plug to get pulled. But you're telling me, in that wide time gap he had earlier, he couldn't deliberately cut the plug to close the portal? They literally showed how easy it is and he still failed at it. Strange eventually gets back up when Spider-Man joins the fight.
We're going to the Dark Dimension till I can figure out how to get you back home. Wait!
So much is wrong with this singular action. First of all, why didn't he start by putting the creature in the Dark Dimension if he wanted to keep the damage contained somewhere else? Second of all, he should know how to get this creature home because he literally saw where it came from. Third of all, if he was going to open a portal to the Dark Dimension, why not open it underneath the creature instead of right behind it? Was he expecting it to randomly walk backwards and fall? Because Spider-Man kicking him into the portal sure as hell wasn't the plan, but fine. It failed, so he had to bring them both back. Why not try again by opening the portal underneath the creature this time?
I think I can get that wormhole thing open again, but I'll need a bit of time.
That's what brought the symbiote here to begin with. Why doesn't Strange stop Peter and tell him that he can use the portals to bring the creature there, then actually do it this time? He then uses the time stone on the symbiote creature, indicating that he can selectively use it on whatever he wants. Would have helped to send the monster back where it came from the moment it started walking into the lab. Strange then prepares a sword and shield instead of opening a portal underneath the creature to send it to the Dark Dimension. And then, this results in them falling into the portal, then having the time stone manipulate it, so that they go back to the past, looping this back to episode 1 where he fought in Midtown High, and we see the spider crawling around so it ends up back to the past with Strange. Which means the origin story of Spider-Man has been overcomplicated to hell, and turned into some destined, inevitable time loop. This entire plotline with Doctor Strange does nothing to service the story, outside of overcomplicating what should have been a simple origin story for us to move on from after it's over with. What is going on? If Doctor Strange unplugged the portal as he should have earlier, then Peter never becomes Spider-Man. If Doctor Strange puts the symbiote in the Dark Dimension on its own, Peter never becomes Spider-Man. If Doctor Strange used the time stone to put the creature back into space, Peter never becomes Spider-Man. If Norman didn't stupidly reveal his plan, Peter never becomes Spider-Man. If Peter shut down the machine like he should have, he never becomes Spider-Man. Talk about original anomalies. All these time paradoxes, time loops, magic inconsistencies, and all these ridiculous technicalities just so we can have the origin story of Spider-Man. This is overly nonsensical and is disrespectful to the concept of Spider-Man. And the Doctor Strange fight that I talked about at the beginning of this video is now made even worse because we have confirmation that Strange had prior experience with this creature and still acted as stupidly as he did. Remember when Strange opened a portal over a truck in the first episode? If he could just add time travel to his portals, why not do that to send the creature back to the present? To their surprise, more symbiotes show up through the portal when they reopen it. Why doesn't Strange open a portal in front of the tech portal so it's looped and they can't actually enter? Why does Spider-Man throw the symbiote in a way that could have killed Doctor Strange? He only dodged it at the last second. Peter could have killed Doctor Strange with this ridiculous plan. And then Peter brings down the entire portal. Don't know how he was struggling this badly when all he needed to do was disable the power source. That's literally what happened earlier.
What'd you say your name was again?
Pete, I mean, Spider-Man.
Good save, kid.
How are you still bad at this after all these episodes? Oh, and the Watcher is here. I've heard quite some stories about this guy. For those who have watched What If, feel free to share how he might be relevant in the comments because I'm not super invested in digging into that side of Marvel. This show remembers that Daredevil exists, and they reveal that he had a spy at Oscorp who will also be spying on Harry's new company. Wait, so Daredevil had a spy that could have alerted him about the portal and the symbiote creature, but Daredevil never shows up to handle it when his spy would have every reason to bring this to his attention? And even after Oscorp is under fire from the experiment gone wrong, they do nothing to follow up on what Daredevil has actually stolen from Oscorp. What was Norman hiding that Daredevil knew of? Was it that he was making a portal all the way to space? Because that makes it really dumb for a spy to be surprised by this when learning of it. If it's not the portal to space, then I don't know what it is that Daredevil found off his computer, and it sounds to me like they're not interested in resolving this plotline that they set up. This entire ending is just setup after setup and not storytelling. Peter and Norman don't even have a conversation about what happened. There's no endpoint to their plotline. Norman just says that he didn't mean for it to happen, and Peter no longer trusts Norman at the end, yet there's no discussion or confrontation on what Norman has done and his methods overall. There's no exploration as to how this changes Peter as a character and his mindset moving forward. That final conversation between Peter and Norman is kind of important to wrap up that storyline, but I guess we're too busy setting up another symbiote arc. We can't have a final conversation between Lonnie and Pearl, or even have a meaningful conversation where Spider-Man talks to Lonnie to understand why he turned to gang life to begin with, because we're too busy setting up the 1/10th Intelligence finding a new spot with Lonnie as their new leader. Also, I don't think it makes sense for Lonnie to continue the 1/10th Intelligence, considering these people endanger children and are okay with endangering civilians on the road. He should have just disbanded the gang, and if he actually wanted to work with anyone to make the city a better place, he should be working with Spider-Man. We also can't have any exploration on where Nico's insecurities and abandonment issues come from, so we can understand her more as a character, considering that's the reason she gives for why she doesn't like that Peter is keeping secrets. She feels that means he's going to abandon her like everyone else in her life. This is never explored and merely set up at the end of the season by showing us that she voices magic spells to talk to her mom. So wait, she has this whole secret about being a magic user, but gave Peter such a hard time for keeping a secret about being a superhero. Her motivation to be mad at Peter can't be taken seriously anymore when she has secrets of her own, which would require her to understand how Peter could do this, but also care about her. They did the one thing they shouldn't have done in order for her motivation to work. Her character went from relying on setups without payoffs to being downright inconsistent. But no, we can't spend time actually exploring our characters because we need to spend time on Doc Ock designing his arms that we already saw in an earlier episode. We can't have meaningful moments where Aunt May shows vulnerability or has to develop as a character because we're too busy setting up Richard Parker in prison, played by a much better Spider-Man you wish you were watching instead. Spider-Man's final swing feels soulless because it feels like we've barely achieved anything with his character. He has a really poorly constructed character journey. He makes some really out-of-character decisions. His major character payoffs are often rushed or just nonsensical. He's not endearing or compelling, and I'm not feeling proud of this version of Peter Parker. This final episode also sits at a 1 out of 10. This was truly disastrous.
Hey, little man, how's it going? Yeah?
This entire season is a mess, and it's beyond me that this got a season 3 greenlit before the spectacular Spider-Man did. This season is a structural disaster. It juggles with so many different subplots and setups that it doesn't have the time or room to follow through with satisfying and coherent payoffs, or concluding elements to its most important plot lines. The plot is filled with ridiculous holes, it does immense damage to characters, and when the character writing isn't downright broken or inconsistent, it's often shallow and lacking in standout moments. This season is a 2 out of 10 at best. I've heard people put this series above the 90s series, the new animated series, Spectacular, Unlimited. I really don't see it. And I really don't see how this is an improvement over Homecoming or Far From Home. If anything, it's even worse. What's so good about this show? What stands out about this show that other Spider-Man works haven't done already and done better? Why should I invest in this currently running Spider-Man when there's another animated version that handles every element of storytelling and animation far better? Why should I be excited for the next season? If someone could put all of this into words for me, be my guest. But until then, I'm either going to stick with the classic stories or enjoy the few gems in modern day.